So I've decided to spend a year reading the foundational texts of psychoanalysis. And I'm starting with the book that started it all, Sigmund Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams, published in 1900. And I need to tell you, this book is wild, both in what it says and how it says it. So Freud basically walked up to the entire medical establishment of the Victorian era and says, hey, you know dreams, those random, meaningless things that happen when we're sleeping? Yeah, well, they're actually carefully disguised wishes, every single one of them, and I can prove it. Now here's where Freud does something kind of brilliant, but also kind of frustrating as a reader. He structures this book in a really unusual way. He starts chapter 1 reviewing all the existing scientific literature on dreams, and basically dismissing it all as missing the point. His criticism is that the literature lacks systematic method, contradicts itself, avoids the unconscious, that's important, and that it misses core function of dreams, which, in Freud's theory, is wish fulfillment. He then makes his thesis. The dream is the disguised fulfillment of a suppressed wish. Then, in chapter 2, instead of laying out his theory or method clearly, he just dives straight into analyzing one of his own dreams, the Irma dream, even before explaining how dream analysis works. He doesn't explain how he's analyzing it. He doesn't give you the tools to understand what he's doing. He just does it, and he trusts that you'll follow along. It's only later in chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6 that he circles back and explains the mechanisms: condensation, displacement, wish fulfillment, and the dream work. It's kind of like if someone showed you a magic trick and then only explained how they did it 3 hours later. And you know what? I'm going to follow the same structure in these videos. So we're going to jump into the deep end with Freud, experience the Irma dream analysis in all its weird, revealing glory. And then in later episodes, I'll explain what he's actually doing. So buckle up. We're about to watch Freud psychoanalyze himself, and it's going to reveal way more than he probably intended. So I need to tell you about something that completely changed how I read Freud. I'm working through the interpretation of dreams, and I hit this section where Freud analyzes his own dream about a patient named Irma. On the surface, it looks like Freud demonstrating his new method, showing us how dreams reveal unconscious wishes. But as I'm reading, these details start to jump out at me. Nasal structures, cocaine, medical guilt, terminal bones, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, I know who this is about. Here's the wild part. When readers picked up this book in 1900, they had no idea what they were really reading. It would be over 50 years before anyone outside of Freud's inner circle understood what was actually happening in this dream. They thought they were reading dream theory, right? But they were actually reading one of the most revealing confessions in the history of psychology, hidden in plain sight. Let me give you the full context, because every detail matters here. So in real life, Freud had this patient named Irma, a young widow and family friend that he had been treating psychoanalytically. And the treatment was going okay, but she still had some unresolved symptoms. Now, treating a widow in 1890s Vienna was already complicated. You couldn't directly address certain things, you know what I mean? Like sexual fulfillment was completely off the table as a therapeutic topic. This was just like taboo for the time. In any case, eventually, Freud's colleague named Otto, who was also a doctor, goes and visits Irma and comes back and says to Freud, Irma is better, but not quite well. Freud takes this as a personal insult, like Otto is telling him that he's not a good doctor. So that night, Freud is feeling personally insulted. And in what might be history's most productive bout of professional anxiety, Freud stays up writing out Irma's entire case history to justify himself. And he goes to bed with all of this swirling in his head, the treatment limitations, Otto's judgment, and his own professional insecurities. And then he has the dream. In the dream, Freud's at this big party in this grand hall, and he sees Irma and immediately pulls her to the side. No pleasantries, he just starts lecturing to her. If you still have pains, he tells her, it's your own fault because you won't accept my solution. Now, already we can see what's happening, right? Dream Freud is doing what real-life Freud wishes he could do. He wants to blame the patient for the treatment not working perfectly and her symptoms not going away. But then it gets weird. Like in the dream, it gets weird. Irma complains about pains in her throat, and Freud decides to examine her right there at the party. She resists at first. She doesn't want to open her mouth, but he insists. When she finally agrees to let him inspect her, he's horrified. He sees these white patches, like these scabs, these structures that look like nasal bones in her throat. Now he's panicking. He calls over Dr. M, a senior colleague, and then more doctors appear. They're all examining her, talking over each other, throwing out diagnoses. And then comes the revelation. Irma has an infection from an injection. And Otto gave it to her. He used a dirty syringe. The preparation was something called trimethylamine, and Freud even sees the chemical formula printed in bold. The dream ends with all the doctors basically agreeing that this is Otto's fault for being so careless with injections. He's the real problem here. He is why Irma was still sick. Now, Freud's official analysis is fascinating enough on its own. He recognizes that the dream is structured like a legal defense. That's exactly what Freud's dream is doing, right? It's piling on contradictory excuses. Irma won't accept treatment, and it was her fault. Her problem is organic, it's not psychological, which isn't Freud's department. Otto caused it with a dirty injection, which is definitely not Freud's fault. Look how conscientious I am compared to all these other doctors that showed up in the dream. So Freud sees this. He admits his dream is throwing everything at the wall to avoid responsibility. He's basically saying, look at how desperately my unconscious is trying to let me off the hook. But here's where it gets incredible. As I'm reading Freud's associations, the detailed analysis where he unpacks each symbol, these specific details keep appearing that made the hair on my neck stand up. He mentions examining turbinal bones in the throat. So turbinal bones are in the nose, not the throat. That's already weird. Then he talks about trimethylamine, which he connects to sexuality and specifically to the sexual problems of widows. He brings up cocaine, and he's clearly anxious about it, calling his recommendation of it as medicine one of the gravest mistakes of his early career. And then he mentions a friend who has some kind of nasal illness. He keeps expressing deep anxiety about medical guilt. And then it hit me. This isn't just about some unnamed friend. This is about Wilhelm Fliess. And who was Wilhelm Fliess? Okay, so for those who don't know, and readers in the 1900s certainly didn't, Wilhelm Fliess was Freud's closest intellectual companion at this time. He was an ear, nose, and throat doctor in Berlin who had some pretty eccentric theories. Fliess believed that the nose was connected to the female reproductive system. This is what he thought. He thought sexual problems in women could be cured by operating on their noses, and he was a big advocate of using cocaine medicinally, something Freud had also promoted before recognizing how dangerous it was. But here's the truly horrifying part. In real life, Freud had referred a patient named Emma Eckstein to Wilhelm Fliess for nasal surgery. She had been suffering from hysteria and stomach complaints, and Fliess was convinced he could cure her by operating on her nose. Now, during the surgery, Fliess made a catastrophic error. He packed her nasal cavity with gauze, and then he forgot to remove it. Emma Eckstein suffered massive hemorrhaging. She nearly died from an infection. That's important. She nearly died from an infection. When another doctor finally discovered the forgotten gauze and pulled it out, Emma hemorrhaged so severely that she almost bled to death on the spot, and she was left permanently disfigured. And Freud is the one who sent her to see Fliess. He had been the referring physician. He bore responsibility for putting his patient in the hands of someone who nearly killed her through his recklessness. Once you know about Fliess, the Irma dream transforms completely. These aren't random medical anxieties. They're specific crushing guilts. The turbinal bones in the wrong place, that's Fliess's nasal surgery obsession bleeding through. The injection with the dirty needle, That's the botched real-life surgery just displaced onto Otto with a dirty needle. The trimethylamine and sexuality, that's Fleiss's theory about nasal genital connections. The cocaine anxiety, that's Freud's guilt about promoting dangerous treatments. This entire dream is Freud torturing himself about guilt over Emma Eckstein and his desire to absolve himself. Even the structure of the dream, where Otto becomes the careless doctor who hurts patients, that's Freud's unconscious trying to displace his guilt about Fleiss onto someone else. What really gets me is that even I could see it, and I'm not Freud. I didn't have this dream. I'm not the one who referred a patient to a colleague who nearly killed her. But the associations in the dream were so clear, so specific, that even reading about it 120 years later, I knew exactly who this dream was really about. Later in the book, he actually explains how a single dream character can represent multiple people at once. He calls this condensation. But in the Irma dream, he never admits Irma and Otto are composites of Emma and Fleiss. Because once you realize it, the whole dream transforms. It's no longer just professional anxiety that Freud wrote about in the book. It's also about the guilt and grief he's feeling for the part he played in harming Emma Eckstein. And that's the most psychoanalytic thing of all. The very theory Freud uses to decode dreams is at work on him as he's writing the book. He's showing us how the mind disguises unbearable truths without even realizing it. This raises an obvious question. If it's so clear the dream is about Fleiss, why didn't Freud just say so? It wasn't patient confidentiality, right? Fleiss wasn't a patient of his. The real reasons are much more human and complicated. So first, there's the emotional factor. Freud and Fleiss had an intensely close relationship. They wrote hundreds of letters to each other. This is now public information, but nobody knew about it back then at the time. But in real life, Fleiss was Freud's main intellectual companion during his self-analysis. At this point, Fleiss was somehow still a respected doctor in Berlin. His theories might have been eccentric, but he hadn't been publicly discredited. And the Emma Eckstein disaster was known only to their immediate circle. Admitting that his closest collaborator was a dangerous quack would completely undermine his authority. How could Freud claim to understand the human mind if he couldn't even judge the character of his closest friend that he had been collaborating with for years? And finally, and this is like peak Freud, by not naming Fleiss, Freud performs exactly the kind of repression and displacement he's describing in his theory. The guilt is there for anyone who could read the symbols, but it's disguised enough to protect both men publicly. And here's what really blows my mind. This backstory stayed hidden for over 50 years. The Freud-Fleiss letters, they weren't published until the 1950s. For half a century, people read the Irma dream as Freud demonstrating his method on a fairly straightforward case of professional anxiety. They had no idea they were reading a confession about dangerous medical referrals, cocaine experimentation gone horribly wrong, a near-fatal surgical disaster, and the slow realization that your closest intellectual ally is actually a threat to patients and possibly himself. And the guilt in this section isn't abstract or theoretical. When Freud writes about being gravely reproached for his medical recommendations, when he obsesses about conscientiousness, you can feel the weight of Emma Eckstein's near-death haunting him. The real insight here, it's that dreams reveal our deepest conflicts and guilts, especially the ones we can't fully face in waking life. The Irma dream is Freud's unconscious forcing him to confront what his conscious mind was still avoiding. What strikes me most is how this text operates on two completely different levels. For readers in 1900, it was Freud demonstrating his revolutionary method of dream analysis. Look, he's showing how dreams have meaning, right? See how free association reveals hidden wishes. But for us, reading with full historical knowledge and the benefit of hindsight, it's something entirely different. It's Freud processing trauma. It's a confession hidden in academic language. It's a man realizing he needs to cut a dangerous person out of his life. The fact that both readings work, that the text functions as both theoretical demonstration and personal confession, that's what makes it so brilliant. Freud managed to write his most personal professional crisis into his most public theoretical work, and nobody noticed for 50 years. There's a final irony here that's almost too perfect. Freud develops his entire method of dream interpretation, free association, symbolic analysis, the search for latent meaning, and the very first major example proves the method works almost too well. Even he couldn't fully conceal what the dream was really about. In trying to demonstrate that dreams reveal hidden wishes, Freud accidentally demonstrated something even more profound, that our deepest guilts and conflicts will find expression no matter how hard we try to repress them. When I started reading The Interpretation of Dreams, I expected dry theory and outdated Victorian ideas. What I found in the Irma dream was something completely different. It's Freud's unconscious mind forcing him to face what his conscious mind was still avoiding. I think one of the reasons this hits me hard is because I'm at that exact point in my career. I'm seeing clients now. I'm part of managed care teams with other therapists, with psychiatrists. And when a client needs medication or specialized treatment, I have to refer them out to like a psychiatrist or a prescribing physician. And I have to trust the person I'm sending them to that they will help them, not harm them. The idea of referring a client to someone who turns out to be a fleece is terrifying. So Freud's guilt about Emma Eckstein is every clinician's nightmare. You use your best judgment and your patient ends up worse because you trusted the wrong person. Yeah, but what do you think? Have you ever had to distance yourself from a colleague who turned out to be harmful? And just in regular life, have you ever been part of a friend group or had like a best friend or a close friend or even a family member that you were really close with? And then you realized, whoa, this person's like dangerous, or that I shouldn't be around this person. They're causing either psychological harm in my life or other people around me. How do you cut ties with those people? I think one of the other reasons this hit me so hard is because I've done that in real life several times. I think maybe because of my early childhood experiences, right? To put my Freud hat on for a second. Because of the way I was raised, maybe I had been conditioned to not always recognize when people mean to do you harm or when people don't have your best interests in mind. And because of that, I will let people into my life and I'll wait too long before I cut them out of my life because I don't always recognize what a danger these people really are. And this is something I've had to struggle with. By making the unconscious conscious, I can make better decisions and realize, hey, these people, I don't have time for them. I don't have the energy for them. And you have to cut them out. And sometimes that can feel a little harsh, but you have to have boundaries, right? This is about boundaries. And anyway, is that something you've struggled with? Let me know in the comments below if you've even made it this far. If you have, thank you so much for watching. This is the first part of my review of The Interpretation of Dreams. The next part, I'll get more into the way the dreams work. And there's some great stuff coming up. This was a really good book. If you haven't read it, you should check it out. If not, hope to see you in the next one anyway. Anyway, my name is Vince. Hope you're having a great day, and I'll see you next time.